from Kansas State University. This is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. In the lineup today, from Oklahoma State University, Derrell with this week's observations on the cattle market. As part of that, Derrell will offer his outlook on winter wheat pasturing profitability heading into the fall. Derrell's followed then by K-State's John Holman, as he'll talk about the agronomic side of establishing fall-planted cereal grains as grazing forage. Later, Britton Rucker is joined by K-State's Dale Blasi as they'll preview the 2019 Beef Stocker Field Day at K-State, set for a week from this Thursday. And Jeff Wickman has this week's 4-H segment. He'll visit with K-State's Amy Sollock about the 4-H events still ahead this week at the Kansas State Fair. All that here on Agriculture Today.
Hamburgers, roast, ribs, steak, or whatever you prefer. Beef, it's what's for dinner. Kansas cattle farmers produce 7.5 million head of cattle per year. It takes about 7 tablespoons of peanut butter to get the same amount of protein in 1 serving of lean beef. Support your local Kansas farmers and ranchers. Eat beef. This message was brought to you by the K-State Animal Sciences Leadership Academy participants.
You're listening to Agriculture Today, coming to you from the campus of Kansas State University. Good to have you aboard once again. For this week's cattle market insight, we turn, though, to a livestock economist at Oklahoma State University. He routinely joins us here, Derrell Peel, to lend us his thoughts on these trades, which aren't exactly roaring right now, Derrell. We see this tumble late last week in the cattle futures. The cash-fed cattle market is on the brink of dropping below $100 for the first time in a long while. Not exactly a pretty picture out there right now.
It's pretty tough for cattle markets right now. There's just a lot of things biting at this market right now. The markets in general, of course, are on the defensive because of a lot of broad-based unrest in the U.S. economy and the global economy. When you add to that some of the challenges we've had, recently, obviously with the packing plant fire most recently, but the general uncertainty associated with feed markets and the corn crop, and then we look at our trade picture, which at part of the time has been a little bit weaker, although we can talk about the most recent data. So all in all, I think these markets are just awfully skittish right now, and there's a lot of things going on in both the futures and the cash markets.
The market aftermath of that Tyson fire at the Holcomb plant, let's visit about that a bit. It's been something of a lightning rod, or at least a point of conversation. How the market reacted, whether that actual price response was really jiving with the supply out there. Have you any thoughts on that?
Well, I would say in general that the response of this market to that sudden shock has actually been very close to what I would have predicted. Okay. Now we can debate the levels of the price adjustments that we've seen, but especially if you look at the slaughter response, this plant was a sizable plant, about 5% of steer and heifer slaughter capacity, and yet if you look at the daily slaughter patterns, slaughter totals that came in for the 2 weeks after that, which we now have data for, actual data, it shows that the industry did a remarkably good job with about a week's time of compensating for the loss of that plant and minimizing the reduction in slaughter the week after the plant, at least by the time you include a Saturday kill, and actually in the second week after the fire, put together a slight increase relative to the week before the fire. If you look at the boxed beef side of that, we shot up and we have come back down pretty dramatically, just again, much as you would anticipate a market that's trying to scramble around and cover short supplies. You see that in the different primal levels and different reactions slightly in different markets, but all following the same general pattern.
We're soon, domestically, going to be heading down the home stretch of the summer grilling season, if you will. So will we typically see a hit on domestic beef demand as summer slips into fall?
We do see some changes in that seasonal demand as we go into the fall. And part of it is a shift in product focus. Again, we talk about beef demand as though it's one thing, but obviously It's much more complex than that when you look at the broad set of products. So once we get past Labor Day, we sort of take the focus a little bit off of middle meats for a while. As we get into the fall and cooler weather, then we put more focus on the end meats. We start thinking about, pot roasts and those kind of things that come along with cooler weather. So we'll see some of that. And then, of course, if you look at the ribs, you'll see a kick up here in October and November as we anticipate the popularity of prime rib for Christmas and New Year's holiday. So there's always things going on. Some are going up or some are going down, but overall, we would think of this as a little bit weaker demand once we take that summer grilling season away from both, middle meats, the steaks, as well as from the hamburger market.
And as you said, we've new beef trade data on the export scene. And is there anything enthusing within those new numbers, Derrell?
Well, actually, the most recent month was a little bit encouraging relative to some of what we've seen lately. Beef exports were down in the month of July, which is the most recent data. They were down 2.2%. That gives us a 7-month year-to-date total that's down 2.9%. We were a little over 3% down. So it's not massive weakness there. It is a concern. Probably one of the biggest points of concern in the export side for beef is the fact that Japan in July was down 9.3%. It's down over 6% for the year to date. And of course, Japan is our biggest market and our most valuable market. And so, that weakness there is a concern. And it is apparent that that's one of the residual effects of the U.S. not being part of the TPP, which other countries pursued and now have a more favorable tariff situation in Japan.
So all the more imperative that whatever this U.S.-Japanese trade deal ends up being, the one that has been agreed upon in principle, that's going to be an important jumpstart, hopefully, for our beef sales into Japan.
That's right. It's very critical that we, get some agreement in place so that we can maintain our market share there.
You keep a close eye on wheat grazing prospects in Oklahoma and Kansas, and let's visit about that a bit and whether or not those grazing programs might show a worthwhile return to producers as we look forward. First, we have to start with the outlook for actually establishing wheat pasture, which by all accounts appears to be pretty good given the soil moisture situation.
That's right. It's always a trick coming out of a hot summer to have the moisture conditions and the soil temperature conditions to support early establishment of wheat for winter grazing. Those conditions look pretty favorable in 2019. Now, there are years when we have moisture to get wheat planted and get it up, and then it turns dry relatively early in the fall, and obviously we're going to continue to need moisture. But right now the conditions look pretty good. Anecdotally, I hear from some producers that quite a bit of wheat has already been planted in some areas, and certainly a lot more is going in for those folks that are really interested in early wheat establishment for winter grazing.
But how do the numbers shake out in as far as whether those programs are likely to be a paying proposition when you look at current feeder cattle prices and the outlook for same?
The budgets, I've run a few budgets at this point in time. They look kind of, sort of break even typically, which means that you're paying the bills, but maybe not making a lot beyond that. Obviously, we have seen the weakness we've seen in the feeder cattle markets, which we alluded to earlier, provides a bit of a buying opportunity here in the short run, and some producers may jump out there maybe even a little earlier than they normally would buy and take advantage of that. On the other hand, of course, the weak futures market, if you use that as your anticipation for where we might be in the spring, is also pretty weak. So, again, it doesn't look bad, but it doesn't look spectacular either at this point. I think with the dynamics in this market, it's going to be one that producers need to follow pretty closely, probably pencil it and repencil it a couple of times as we go through the fall.
There is an element of risk.
Certainly is.
So one has to walk through the numbers on their own to see if that's going to work for them. But we will watch that very closely as the summer transitions into fall and the pasture starts to be established. Derrell, your thoughts on the trade this coming week, coming off of a down week for both futures and the cash cattle trades? Will we see a rebound?
Well, I really think we probably will see a little bit of a rebound. We got a couple things going on. Again, if you look seasonally, Labor Day is essentially the seasonal low typically for fed cattle prices. That point was accentuated this year with the plant fire in August and the residual impacts of that. It's taking longer for the fed cattle market probably than any other market to bounce back from those fire impacts, simply because with the loss of that packing plant, we are pushing slaughter capacity pretty close to its limits at this point. And that gives limited flexibility, and I think that's part of what's keeping this fed cattle market on its heels. That said, as we go forward here over the next few weeks, that I do expect to see those effects sort of work their way through the market and out of the market, and that we will see a little bit of an opportunity here for some stabilization, if not a little pickup in these fed cattle prices.
And feeders, same notation?
Well, feeders, again, is a tough proposition. Seasonally, we're looking for weaker prices from August into September and then on into the seasonal low in October. So that's one factor. In the southern plains, and at least in Oklahoma with the data I've analyzed for many years, wheat pasture conditions can moderate that, especially in September. Good wheat pasture demand can actually stabilize or even pull up feeder cattle prices, especially the lightweight stocker-type cattle, in September, and then maybe mute the normal seasonal low that we would see in October. So that could be happening. On the other hand, feeder markets are very much skittish about what's going to happen with this corn crop and the potential for higher corn prices that could come out of that. So it's a mixed bag, and again, a very dynamic situation. I think one that, whether you're selling calves as a cow-calf producer or thinking about buying stocker cattle, you really have to follow this market pretty closely here and sort out the dynamics as we go forward.
Hardly a dull moment in these trades, that's for certain. And Derrell, once again, a pleasure. We'll catch up with you again in a few weeks. Many thanks.
You bet. Anytime.
He is Derrell Peel, and a livestock economist at Oklahoma State University. He contributes regularly to our cattle market segment here on Agriculture Today. By the way, check out the materials that Derrell routinely posts on the website out of OSU. Go to beefextension.com. As simple as that, beefextension.com. There is a link toward the lower right-hand part of that page taking you to the Livestock Marketing Update. And that's where you'll find Derrell's regular posts on the cattle market scene. Next up, we'll talk about establishing those small grains forages for grazing this fall into winter here on the K-State Radio Network.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Agriculture Today now continues on the K-State Radio Network. You'll recall on last Friday's broadcast, K-State forage agronomist John Holman was with us as he offered some thoughts on putting up quality and good quantity corn or sorghum silage, as we're into that stage of the season now where many of you producers are ensiling those crops or soon will be. But we didn't quite finish up that conversation with John, for he wanted to add some thoughts as well about other forage options that can be harvested here in the fall or planted in the case of winter annual grasses like wheat, like triticale. We'll get into that in a few moments. But John, putting up grain sorghum as a hay crop, that's a viable alternative for numerous producers here in Kansas. But again, as with harvesting silage, timeliness is everything.
It sure is, Eric. Yeah, certainly as we delay our harvest of those crops, our forage yield can be increased, but our quality greatly decreases. Mm-hmm. And so kind of an optimum time is to harvest that crop when it first starts to head. If we have adequate moisture, then that also would allow us to come back and take a second cutting. There's kind of two schools of thought on that crop. One is to lay that windrow out fairly wide, as wide as your pickup will allow with the baler, to get the most solar radiation on that crop and dry it down as quickly as possible. Now, there is the other school of thought is to put that crop a little bit narrower and to try and minimize the amount of area that is going to be rained on, because that crop requires at least 10 days to 2 weeks of drying time, depending on, again, weather conditions. So quite often the crop will be rained on. So that's kind of the two schools of thought. If you cut that crop, though, and leave a little bit of stubble height, that kind of helps hold that crop up a little bit off the ground and kind of aids with that drying process, and will also aid if we do get a little bit of rain, kind of help keep that crop from, worst case, getting kind of down in the soil and not being able to pick it up. Also, cutting a little bit higher helps to improve feed value and reduce nitrate in the crop. That's something we want to be thinking about as we start to put up those hay crops. Once you cut it, the nitrate that is there at the time that you cut it, it's going to be there. Mm-hmm. With silage, we can reduce our nitrate levels by about half. And some of the work we've seen with cutting a little bit higher is we can improve our milk per ton, so the feed value is a little bit higher, and we don't give up too much loss in dry matter per acre while we are able to improve our quality of the product.
But you touched upon something there very important, making sure that there are no nitrate toxicity issues with that sorghum as you put it up. Prussic acid issues, are those looming out there as well, John?
Well, Eric, prussic acid dissipates when the crop is cut, and as it dries down, then the prussic acid dissipates, and so that's no longer an issue. Mm-hmm. But it can be an issue this time of the year. Really, prussic acid can be an issue really 2 times of the year. Earlier in the year when we have new regrowth and we turn cattle out to graze it, mm-hmm. or also as we come into the fall and we maybe take our first cutting of hay off, or even as we think about maybe grazing grain sorghum stalks or something like that. If we get those light nippy frosts, then that can elevate prussic acid risk when we are grazing cattle. So it's not, prussic acid isn't a concern with baled feed, but it can certainly be a problem in the fall when we are grazing. Mm-hmm. And so in order to eliminate that risk in the late in the fall, what we really need to do when we can be grazing safely, but then when we start getting those light frosts, it's best to remove the cattle from the field and then wait for a good hard killing frost. And then once we receive that, wait 10 to 14 days and allow that prussic acid to dissipate before we turn cattle back out on there, and then we'll be safe then from the prussic acid concern.
So tuck that piece of information away as you might be turning cattle out here on the residue of those harvested forages here later on this year. A couple of other things briefly here, John. The last cutting of alfalfa, when to take it? That is a perennial question.
Yeah.
And it's
exactly.
it's a weather-driven question as well, right?
It is a weather-driven question. We want to time that, really the second to the last cutting, to give that crop ample time to store root reserves, to have good overwinter survivability, and to green up in the spring. And so we want to give that crop 30 to 45 days of time to do that before the killing frost. And so, our first killing frost in Kansas can range anywhere from the 1st of October to the end of October. So, now if we haven't taken our cutting of alfalfa, now would be the time to be doing that. And then we don't want to cut that crop again until a killing frost occurs. And so, it may be tempting to go out there and take a cutting, say, the middle of October. We haven't had a killing frost. But if we did that and we get a little bit of regrowth and then we get a killing frost, we could really damage that crop. So it's best then to take that last cutting as soon as a killing frost does hit. But a producer would want to be very timely about getting back in the field, because if you wait any time at all, that crop will be drying down and dropping leaves. And so you may have to swath while there's a little bit of dew on that plant, but be careful not to have wet soil, not be laying that windrow into wet soil. Mm-hmm. And this is also the time of the year, if we're thinking about for alfalfa, planting alfalfa. Mm-hmm. This is a good time in the fall, about this time to plant that crop and give that crop enough growth to overwinter. So now would also be a time for a person to consider planting alfalfa. And then now we're on the topic of planting. We're not too far away to be thinking about putting some triticale or rye or wheat planting for fall grazing. Of course, there's things to be concerned about with planting wheat too early with wheat streak mosaic or Hessian fly that we don't have to worry about with the triticale or rye.
When it comes to planting those grasses, though, either triticale or wheat or rye, as a feedstuff, the rules of establishing that stand are a bit different than they would be for growing for grain, right?
Right, Eric. If we're looking at planting a crop for grain, we're definitely going to want to wait. That planting window will vary across the state. But, if we're planting it for grazing purposes, we'll usually plant 2 to 3 weeks earlier than for grain. But if we plant early, that can cause some, and without the intention of grazing, that can cause some unnecessary water use in the fall, and that could hurt us later with grain production. And then also our seeding rate with grazing production, we maybe want to bump that seeding rate up 25-30% versus grain production.
You're looking for tonnage in this case, and so some of those adjustments would be necessary. And by the way, K-State has loads of information on raising those winter annual grasses at the Extension Resources, where you can tap into that information, get some guidelines on growing wheat, growing triticale for pasturing purposes. But again, John, we're really into the crunch time for managing forages of multiple types. And if there is an overarching message here, it is that each and every one of these requires a fair measure of management here, and producers should not scrimp on that management, whether it be these small grain forages or the corn or sorghum silage crops that we discussed here last Friday.
That's true, Eric, and I guess I'd like to leave one final thought, and that is not to forget about safety. As we're hauling that silage in, trucks flying, that silage pile can be a dangerous place, around and at feed-out time, the face of it, and so, just keep safety in mind so that everybody can go home at the end of the day.
John, thanks for the overview right here. We do appreciate your insight, and we will catch up with you again soon.
Thank you, Eric.
John Holman with us, K-State forage agronomist. He is based in Garden City. Now, some additional information on actually grazing these small grain forage stands that John's been talking with us about. Winter wheat, winter rye, winter triticale, a couple of other options there as well. Spring oats could be planted in the fall, although it's getting a little late for that. And winter barley. Drawing from a K-State write-up that several recently contributed to, including beef systems specialist Jamie Lynn Farney, who has considerable experience in these grazing programs. She tells us that under good growing conditions, a well-fertilized small grain dryland pasture can carry about 500 pounds of cattle per acre. Gains of 1.5 to 2.5 or more pounds per acre per day are possible, and under irrigation, she says much higher stocking rates can be attained. In terms of overall forage quality, the barley is considered the highest, followed by oats, wheat, triticale, and rye in that order. During the fall and early spring periods of peak production, the crude protein content of that small grain pasture is normally about 20 to 25%. Growing cattle require about 12% crude protein, so no protein supplementation would be necessary when using these winter annuals in your grazing system. Jamie Lynn and others at K-State have collected considerable data on using these fall-planted winter annuals as forage. You can tap into that through the K-State Research and Extension website. You are listening to Agriculture Today. We'll return with today's agricultural news headlines and more after this break. This is the K-State Radio Network. Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online.
From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. I'm Britton Rucker. Health management of high-risk calves, humane practices, beef cattle market outlooks, and a panel of discussion on beef parasite control are among topics planned for the 2019 Kansas State University Beef Stocker Field Day on Thursday, September 19th. With me now is beef cattle specialist and faculty of the Beef Stocker Unit, Dale Blasi. Welcome, Dale.
Hi, Britton.
Now, this is the 20th anniversary of this event. Give some history behind this event.
For a fair bit of time, Britton, going back 20, 25 years, our department really was lacking some strengths and some forward motion, if you will, with respect to the stocker and backgrounding segment of our beef industry. And since I've been a part of the faculty here on campus, that's been one of my directives, is to provide additional information and support for this very important segment of our industry.
And it really has evolved throughout the years.
It has, and the one thing at K-State we're blessed with is a core of strength of faculty people that address many issues that are of importance to the stocker and backgrounding segment. And it's been sometimes a challenge, but for the most part, we've had some really good reserves to draw some good information, current topics of interest, of importance for this segment.
Now, Dale, run me through the agenda of the Beef Stocker Unit you have planned for 2019.
The field day that we're going to have on the 19th, one of the bulwarks, if you will, of the program is having a strong ag economist on the program. And Dr. Glenn Tonser this year is providing some insight in terms of the current situation in our industry, the very recent fire at Holcomb, that the ripples of that impact across our industry. But just to give a good general overview in terms of existing trade agreements, those trade agreements that are being in development. I think he brings a very good perspective to our producers and speaks in a very understandable means by which people understand what he's trying to convey. I've got Dr. Dan Thompson's going to talk about health management of high-risk calves. Brett Crosby out of Montana, one of the developers of Beef Basis, a very excellent tool for people looking at the outcome of buy and sell relationships. And then we also have a panel discussion talking about beef parasite control with Ty Brunswig, my colleague, Dr. A.J. Tarpoff, our extension beef veterinarian, and Dr. David Pugh from Southern Tracks Farm and Forage. So I think it's going to be a really good, well-rounded program. There'll be a little bit of anything for people for their interest. For our lunch, rather than having brisket, this year we're going to offer from Nyman Ranch a CAB natural prime ribeye lunch, and all attendees will receive a commemorative steak knife as well, Britton.
Now, it's not just K-State people presenting at this conference.
That's right. Mr. Don Close from Raybo AgriFinance, he authored a paper about 6 months ago addressing the changing industry structure, forging a closer relationship between backgrounding yards and feeders. And he will bring some fresh perspective, and believe it or not, the backgrounding segment offers the greatest opportunity for young producers for entry into the beef industry. Having adequate knowledge of beef cattle care and health management practices can afford a lot of young people an opportunity to break into the beef industry. And so we're very excited about his presentation in terms of shedding some light on how it can fit into the future.
So it really doesn't matter what age you are, anybody can take away something to use on their operation at the end of the day.
That's right. That's really been the intent of developing this field day. We can have a lot of conferences in very clean hotel conference rooms, but having it at the Beef Stocker Unit belongs to the people of Kansas, really gives us great opportunities to do live animal demonstrations and really to help people feel more at ease being in their environment.
Along with these presentations, you are doing some prizes as well.
Yeah, I mean, this is the 20th year of this event, and this year our corporate sponsor is Bayer Animal Health, and in partnership with them, we're providing some prizes that involve some backpack sprayers. I mean, they're looking at a lot of antiparasiticides. I think there's even a fishing trip as well that's going to be provided to those who are present.
Now, those that are interested, where can they go to learn more and to register?
Online, go to www.kshubeef.org. The deadline is set for September 10th, so we've got about a week yet before people can go online. Otherwise, if you would call Miss Lois Schreiner at 785 888-532-1267. She would take your name and number as well.
Well, the K-State Beef Stalker Field Day is once again Thursday, September 19th at the K-State Beef Stalker Unit, beginning at 9:30 with programs kicking off at 10:30. Once again, if you're interested in attending, registration and more information can be found at ksubeef.org with a registration fee of $25 to be paid by September 10th. Once again, a big thank you to beef cattle specialist and faculty of the Beef Stalker Unit, Dale Blasi. Thanks, Dale.
Thank you.
Now it's time for this week's edition of Tree Tales, brought to you by K-State Forester Charlie Barden.
If you are interested in trees or wildlife, then the Fall Forestry Field Day, scheduled for October 9th, is for you. Have you ever seen a sawmill turn a tree into lumber? What about those trees and woodlands along your creek? Are they providing you with all the wildlife, recreation, and water quality benefits that they can? How about methods to control the invasive bush honeysuckle, which may be taking over your woodlands? These questions and many more will be answered at this year's field day held in the Manhattan area. We will begin at 8:30 a.m. at the Geyer Forestry Research Center adjacent to Turtle Creek State Park and conclude in the afternoon at Potawatomi State Lake No. 2, adjourning at 3:30 p.m. Additional topics include a review of the American Tree Farm System benefits for woodland owners, review of research at the site, wildlife management, and using fire in woodlands. Also, recognition of the 2019 Tree Farmer of the Year will also be presented. Expert speakers include staff from the Kansas Forest Service, Kansas Department of Wildlife, Parks and Tourism, a commercial sawmill owner-operator, and others. Yours truly will be providing an overview of forestry research and teaching activities that occur out at the Geyer Center. Registration forms are available at the Kansas Forest Service website at www.kansasforest.org by clicking on News and Events, or by simply calling the Kansas Forest Service at 785-532-3310. It is also available in the events section of their Facebook page, and online registration and payment is available this year via Eventbrite. The $18 registration fee covers a unique Jamaican-style lunch at the nearby Little Grill. Morning refreshments and educational materials will also be offered to participants. A highlight of the meeting is always the social interaction with woodland owners meeting each other from across the state. Again, registration forms are available at the website, www.kansasforest.org, by clicking on the News and Events tab, or by simply calling the Kansas Forest Service at 785-532-3310. You've been listening to Tree Tales. I'm Charles Barden of Forest with K-State Research and Extension.
Thanks, Charlie. I'm Britton Rucker, and this is Agriculture Today, and we'll return with more after this short break over the K-State Radio Network.
Agricultural producers, landowners, and creditors, you have a partner in your legal and financial needs. Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services offers reliable, trusted information and guidance. Whether you need advice for ag credit concerns or are transitioning your operation to the next owner, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services can assist you in making sound decisions for your business. To learn more, call 800-321-3276 or visit us online.
This is Agriculture Today. I'm Jeff Wickman. The Kansas State Fair began its 10-day run last Friday and continues through Sunday in Hutchinson. Celebrating all things Kansas is the theme for this year's State Fair. As part of her message in the 2019 Kansas State Fair Visitor Guide, Kansas Governor Laura Kelly said, "In an era of so much competition for time, the Kansas State Fair remains an outstanding attraction, and for good reason. Regardless of the year or even decade, it's difficult to pass up the State Fair's bounty of interesting exhibits, outstanding entertainment, and delectable treats." 4-H youth from all 105 Kansas counties are responsible for many of those interesting exhibits. Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock encourages state fairgoers to spend some time viewing the animals, exhibits, displays, and shows. Amy, the Kansas State Fair is officially underway in Hutchinson, and a lot going on this past weekend, but still a lot more to come.
Yeah, we have a jam-packed schedule. We've got a lot of exciting events that really highlight and showcase the wonderful learning that took place all year long throughout our Kansas 4-H program.
This is really kind of the Super Bowl, I guess you could say, for 4-H youth. It's what they are targeting for, working for all year long.
Yeah, in most divisions, you've got to qualify in some aspect locally. So, you've had to receive a blue or a purple, kind of a champion at your local county fair or some kind of local exhibit or contest to qualify to come to the state fair. So it really is kind of the best of the best.
There are a number of exhibits that are displayed at the state fair. What are some of the things that people maybe would want to take note of this week?
Yeah, if you're coming to Hutchinson to visit the Kansas State Fair, I would really encourage you to visit 4-H Centennial Hall. All of our static exhibits are on display, and you can see the results and how they did. We've got everything from rocketry and wildlife exhibits to foods, woodworking. Photography is really fun to look at straight down the middle of our building and takes up quite a big space, but there's lots of great photo exhibits. You name it, we've got it. Sewing, quilting. It's really something to see the creative minds of our Kansas youth.
It does give a real indication of the things that they've been working on throughout the year and really, in some cases, the expertise that they have in these areas.
Oh, sure. We're always blown away by the level of mastery that these kids exhibit. They really take what they've learned and create some wonderful exhibits. And in a lot of times you're kind of surprised at the age of the kids, whether it's creative arts and their artistic talents or some of the electricity displays, rocketry. You'll be blown away by what these kids can accomplish.
There are some lesser, I don't want to say lesser known, but there are some things that people don't always take note of when it comes to the fair. And one of those would be like the fashion review, the dog shows, those kind of things.
Yeah, so we've got events all week long. If you're able to come during the middle of the week, we've got several different dairy shows going on that are a little lesser known. I'd like to highlight the public fashion reviews that take place on Saturday, September 14th at 4 o'clock and 5 o'clock in the encampment building. Those are an excellent opportunity to see kids modeling and showcasing what they've either sewn themselves or purchased, being mindful of cost and quality. We've also got the dog show in the Bison Arena on Saturday, September 14th. So come check it out. We've got something for everyone.
When you talk about the dog show, what kind of things go on for the dog show?
It's really fun to watch. There's obedience classes. Agility is always fun, where the child and the dog work through kind of an obstacle course, if you will. It's just like what you see on TV, only Kansas 4-H members and their dogs. And it's really impressive to see how much time it has taken, how much patience and dedication both of the young person and their dog. It's a fun show to watch, so come check it out. I also want to highlight we have a rabbit show on the second weekend. There's rabbit judging contests, and we've got hundreds of rabbits and chickens, too, in the same sort of building on either end, so come check that out, too. There's lots of funny rabbits with interesting feathers, and you'll see things that you don't typically see on TV or in the backyard. We've got some really creative breeds.
There are so many things that go on at the state fair and so many 4-H members involved in this. You could really spend several hours just looking at all of the different 4-H exhibits, displays.
Absolutely. Centennial Hall is located on the very northwest corner of the fairgrounds. It'd be a good place to start. And then we've got exhibits at our crop showcase building. Across the road is the Bison Arena, and then on down kind of clear to the other end and in the livestock barns too. Obviously, we've got a lot going down there on that end as well. So we're pretty much scattered across the fairgrounds. You can't miss us, and hopefully you'll see lots of 4-H clovers and lots of 4-H green and lots of K-State purple.
Well, speaking of K-State purple, there's also a lot of people that you can talk to if you have questions or you'd like to learn more about somebody's project area. There's people there that can answer your questions.
Absolutely. We get lots of questions about, what does the 4-H program look like where I live, and are there clubs that I could join? And absolutely, we'll have that information available. If you're interested in learning more about what extension programs have to offer, we've got a booth in the Pride of Kansas building with K-State Research and Extension. And, of course, there's a K-State booth also in one of the Sunflower exhibit buildings.
Is there a way to find out how people from your area may be doing in terms of the state fair competition?
Yes, we post all results on our kansas4h.org website. There's a hot link right on the main homepage, so you can't miss it. Those results are updated every 30 minutes after they start being submitted. So just check that out at kansas4-h.org.
And if you're looking to go to the Kansas State Fair and you don't have a lot of time, you can kind of pick and choose some things that you might want to do based on the schedule for that day or that weekend?
Yeah, absolutely. Visit the State Fair website, the schedule, there's maps. It's all very user-friendly and public-friendly.
Well, as you mentioned, this is a great time for the Kansas 4-Hers and really a great time for the people of Kansas to get a look at what all of the 4-H members have been doing throughout the year.
Yeah, and really this is a great time of year if you're considering looking for an opportunity for your child to be active in. This is the time of year to join 4-H. The new 4-H year begins October 1. You can join 4-H at any point in the year, but if you want to start at the very beginning, now's the time to check out the clubs near you. We'd be happy to help you find that information.
That's Southwest Area 4-H Youth Development Specialist Amy Sollock. Again, the Kansas State Fair continues through Sunday in Hutchinson. For more information or to see the daily schedule of events, visit kansasstatefair.com. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Eric Atkinson, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.